Okay, welcome everyone to today. Let's get underway. It's just after 1. We do have apologies from Councillors Olsen and Young, and Councillor Boyle is also not making it. Councillor Proctor's going to be in and out. He did say he was going to try and go online for the first session. Not quite sure where Councillors Brannigan and Barker are, but let's kick off, All over to you, Caro. Thank you. Oh, look, sorry. Before I start, publicly just want to, I know this is live stream, but just want to acknowledge Brent and his team for the response yesterday. I've had nothing but positive feedback from a lot of many sources in terms of what was done. So, thank you, Brent, for the response. The public are well catered for, and that, and as I've heard from many, the quickness, the type of response was much appreciated. So, cheers, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. That's all right. Thank you, Mayor Bernie, and kia ora koutou. Good afternoon, everybody. Today we have our annual plan, first of our pre-adoption workshops. So today we would like to cover off several pieces to provide you with some updates about progress since we had our last workshop. We will ask you if you've got any questions about the material that we sent out in the pre-reading, the presentation from the Capital Project Steering Group a couple of weeks ago. After that, Jacinta will take us through a financial update, and then we'll look ahead to adoption. I've got a quick overview of some feedback that we got through fees and charges consultation, and to share a new layout that we're looking at, a new look and feel, a shorter document. And then a key piece is also to check in with you to ask whether there's any additional questions or any other information that you would like to have before you consider the annual plan for adoption. So when we look at our triangle, today we're actually covering off all three parts of it, so that we share the updates and the work that we've been doing. One moment. That you can see the progress that we're making and how we've incorporated your feedback throughout, including about looking for further savings without reducing service levels. And that's the piece about any questions or any further information that you would like ahead of considering adoption in May. To show the pathway about where we are, we've made quite a lot of progress since the first workshop in September when we came to you with the budget assessments. We've then discussed the annual plan approach and consultation options. You gave us feedback that we were sticking to the plan set out in the long-term plan, and that based on that we didn't need to consult. So that was enabling us to make progress since then on drafting documents. Today we've got the content is just outlined. There's a further workshop penciled in for the end of April to come back to you with any of that additional information and answer. To adopt the annual plan and to adopt the fees and charges for 2025-26. The rates will then be struck at the council meeting in June. So that's our pathway. So our first... Oh, cool. Thank you. I'll try this one. Yeah, great. Thank you for that. So in our first parts, from the reading that you had in the presentation from the Capital Project Steering Group, did anybody have any questions that you would like to follow up on?
capital projects make sense in terms of bringing things forward, and it's still within the thrust of what we approved through the long-term plan. But it was on slide 8, and we've got debt-funded operating costs. And I just was hoping you could remind me what the makeup of, because there's a slight increase for 25, 26 up to 2.8 mil. Can you just remind me what that's made up of?
Sure. So we're trying to definitely show those to you more often as part of the capital project, so you can see that. The key things for us are the things like the district plan, where work's spread over a number of years. As well, there is some water costs that as a council table were decided to be funded by debt a few years ago. But the significant change for next year is mainly in the software space. And while that's typically a capital project from an accounting perspective, if it's software that's on the cloud, then we're not technically able to treat it as capex, even though from a everyday perspective it is a capital project. So that's the key reason for that change in that year. Yeah.
No, that makes sense, because our whole financial strategy is to progressively track that down, and there will always, I think we've agreed that there will always be an element, because there's elements of unfunded depreciation on certain assets, but that's fine. That makes sense.
And just to clarify, so effectively in our financial strategy, by the year 27-28, we will be we're tracking well to be in a fully balanced budget perspective, but that does include, and exactly what you said, Councillor Jennings, a portion of where we would have unfunded depreciation would be the Waka Kotahi funding, or the NZTA funding that relates to renewals that we receive from them. So we don't need to fund it ourselves because it's being funded by central government. Other than that, though, the only debt funded costs that we should have at that point are the ones that are, and also there's an element of some consenting costs that are long-term in nature, that don't necessarily fit the criteria of a capital project, because they span a 5-year period, and it makes good productive sense to treat them in that nature. But using debt to pay for your groceries, those items would not exist after 27-28 as part of our financial strategy.
Because even previously, when we didn't used to fully fund depreciation of solid waste assets, but that's changed now with the legacy landfill. I've forgotten what we called that specific, the landfill legacy stuff, right?
Yeah, that's right, because we're effectively recovering a specific amount through rates each year to make sure that debt's paid off. Yeah. So just from a capital projects perspective then, there was that detailed session. We provided the detail through this workshop. So the intention would be then, when in the middle of May, when the annual plan document comes to you, those schedules of capital projects that are included within and in the annual plan will effectively mirror what you've seen in that presentation. And the only thing that may change between the middle of May and the start of July, maybe if there's been a project that might change timing slightly, where we thought it would be finished by the end of the financial year and the timing doesn't quite match where we thought it would, and we then at that point we would need to come to you and request a capital carryover. Hopefully those will be limited, but just to signal that there is a possibility for some of those. Okay, if there's no questions on capital, then we'll move in to the financial side. So the intent of this is to really highlight where we got to as part of December, and then just have a conversation about some change, which is in a positive sense in terms of where we are now currently proposing the rates to be. So when we set the long-term plan, we thought they would sit at 9%. We came to you before Christmas with them sitting around 11.6. A considerable amount of work was done to then get to a point where we were proposing a 9.3% rates increase. That was signed off by the council table on the 11th of December. We're now in a position where more work has been done, and we'll talk through the key reasons, and you will have read them in the presentation, but around that now being proposed to sit at 8.5% in terms of a proposal for a rates increase that will be recommended as part of the adoption paper. Councillor James, did you have a question there?
Yeah, sorry, just back on that slide. So these numbers are after growth. And I think in our last OPR, we were showing that, maybe it was the previous one, that, I'll phrase it a different way. Like, are we confident that because we've got the after growth assumption in there, that with a sort of a challenging development sector and housing market at the moment, are we still comfortable that we're going to hit that growth number so that these after growth figures, still we can have confidence in them, I guess. Yeah.
It's a great question. So for us at the moment, that growth number includes an assumption of 1.7% in terms of growth. The reason why that's not sitting in the twos is because we do scale it back, because when you have a subdivision, your land value is not going to grow as much. Your capital value will, and the number of units will. But on that question, we are in the middle of detailed work happening at the moment to assess all the growth that we've had in our information database of all the properties and what's been happening with them over the period of time. So over the next couple of weeks, we will have between finance and working with Blair and his team to assess and make sure we're comfortable that that is still reasonable.
Just on that, obviously particularly around living at the moment, there's, and some coming obviously, a lot of body court type developments, in terms of apartments and whatnot. I'm presuming each one of those apartments, and there's 18 sound right, are a singular rating unit. So, and the point there is that would be helping us keep that growth numbers up. Can you comment on that?
Thanks. Yes, that's correct. So as part of the funding impact statement, or the policy that guides the decisions that you make around funding and rates, we have what's called the term separately used or inhabitable part. So it's called a SUIP in everyday language. And so absolutely, if it can be used and lived in separately, then it is treated as a unique property. And so it does factor into that growth calculation. So they would pay a separate fixed charge for the capital value and the land value. The land value growth might not be as significant for the likes of an apartment, but you would see the capital value growth, excluding the land value part, would grow just as much.
Yeah. So can you just remind me? So yeah, when we do that analysis assessment, so we say our assumption is 1.7% growth. So then that's the after growth percentage. But we also factor in that growth number doesn't just bring revenue; it also brings some increased costs. Operational costs, right? So whether it's servicing new public toilets or whatever, particularly if there's vested infrastructure as well. Like, so is there an assumption that we're also including in that 1.7 for increased expenditure or not? Doesn't work like that.
There is, through the budgets, there's some element of increase in growth spending within the budgets themselves. In the overall budgets, there is a level of inflationary increase that's built into it as well. In some areas, though, I would say there is an element of we're going to try and make this work within what we've got as well. So, for example, in the rates team, we're not planning to grow the team because of the growth. And there's some areas of the business where we can do that, and we do, but in some areas it does need to grow, and that would be parks maintenance or other things if there are specific subdivisions.
Sorry.
No, it's good. It all helps with the broader understanding. So in terms of why we've gone from 9.3 or proposing to go from 9.3 down to now sitting at 8.5, the key reason is, and Daniel may want to comment on this, but in terms of the work that James and his team have done around the roading budgets is that they have determined that actually there can be a net saving of 658,000. That's possible in that budget for next year. So having prepared the budgets at the start of the year and then working through them in detail, the recommendation is that within the roading budgets we put forward before Christmas, actually we can make a reduction to that for next year. Daniel, did you want to make any specific comment?
This is reflecting the not necessarily decisions of council, but the implication of the NZTA funding decisions and the decisions that council then were required to make to reallocate the funding in the roading space. So this is just effectively reflecting those decisions that were undertaken last year around reallocation of budgets across that 2-year period.
I won't dwell on this one too much, but it's to just give you a bit of it's something standard that we do as part of every presentation, but just give you a view of the net changes between 24-25 and 25-26. The areas that are I'm highlighting with the pointer here in terms of employee costs, maintenance costs, and other expenses. The key reason why they're jumping around quite a bit is because within the water space, typically in the past, our full cost of delivering what was previously the Alliance contract was done through the maintenance line. And so with having staff on board and handling that delivery differently, that's why you see that movement in those areas. As well, it's important to just think about as well as part of that 8.5, and you think about the conversations in the community and also with members of the public about why is your increase still sitting at 8.5? For our council, if you look at the debt-funded operating costs and the unfunded depreciation, and the driver of them on that rates increase, just over half of our rates increase is actually to catch up on our financial strategy and catch up for those years when we haven't fully funded everything that we ideally would have in the past. So if it was a different world and we hadn't made some of the decisions in the past, we may have been looking at a rates increase that was half of that now. But we are trending well towards a position where in a few years' time, we'll be on the other side of the difficult conversations around this. Of course, that's assuming things stay the same, which often they don't. Does anyone have any questions on this before I move forward?
Jacinta, I've just got a question, I guess, about, so we've started at 9 point something, we're down to 8.5, which is significantly lower than what we indicated that we were doing. I guess what I'm thinking about is there any substantial benefit to potentially holding on to the rates increase at the level as previously proposed or done to our community, with a view of effectively using that to ensure / speed up our operational cost coverage and depreciation that we're on track for 27? Does it make a tangible difference, or would it not?
That's absolutely a decision that this table could make. It would make a difference to the level, but also we are conscious as well of the difference that it's making to our community as well at the moment in terms of some of the pressure that we see on the community in terms of the conversations and the challenges around rates. But it's definitely a balance and a conversation that the table could have.
Jacinta, the QV valuations won't be done for this coming financial year, will they? They'll be for the following financial year.
That's right. So we're in the process of working through the valuation with them, but that won't be for the following year. The indicative valuations will come out around August, September time.
Well, that's an interesting point, because part of me also thinks that by keeping something in reserve, it gives us a greater ability to offset the impact of
a potential impact of another rate rise being driven by valuation costs going up again. There is already an assumption, isn't there, around reval effects, isn't there? They're built into the budget.
The reval is, so in terms of cost, yes, we've seen it higher than we anticipated, but we're in terms of the contract costs. But if the question's around the distribution of rates as a result of the valuation, it won't necessarily the total value of rates won't go up, but how that gets shared across everybody. There may be some significant changes in that, and I know in Wellington they saw that recently with the valuations that they had come back.
I think what I mean, is the impact of a revaluation on depreciation. There's already an assumption built into the. There's already contingency provided for in this budget for an increase on reval effect, and so basically what Councillor Grimstone is saying is, I think suggesting is, what does an extra buffer over and above that look like? Is that a fair summary?
I hear what you're saying in terms of valuation of assets. Sorry, I was thinking you meant the valuation of the properties. I get what you. Yeah. Yes, in terms of the waters ones, so we did the valuation last annual report. So when we go through this cycle now, we're not anticipating any valuation change in that water space. It's more of a check that values haven't changed significantly. We are, though, in the land and building space, that valuation is happening this financial year, which will impact the budgets next year, but we have built in an assumption of what that will be already in terms of its impact on depreciation. But you're absolutely right in the sense of there is a decision around buffer in terms of and or changing the level of unfunded depreciation and the impact that could have on rates going up or down.
Yeah, and I think that's something, if we could get some guidance on today, just noting out timeframes to bring a report to the May meeting for the annual plan to be adopted. Probably just further to your question, Councillor Grimstone, around a buffer to offset the impact of valuation, just the comment I'd make is that if council did want to do that, our revenue and financing policy doesn't provide you a mechanism to use that buffer to where it's most needed. You'd have to fairly distribute that. Otherwise, you would need to be reviewing our rating although Jacinta, just remind me, is there something in our rates remission policy or postponement policy that would allow for it?
Do you mean around the valuation? If a valuation change was to negatively impact, we would need to build something in terms of in a future year. We do, because from an affordability perspective or a significant change, yes, the remission policy would need to be tweaked to accommodate that.
Jacinta, sorry, I'm just thinking around depreciation and local water done well. When we transfer our assets, we transfer our debt. Do we transfer our need to depreciate as well? I mean, is there any impact in terms of our future if we don't fund depreciation now? If it's, local water done well? I mean, are we, I'm just trying to understand the impact or the scenario of that.
It's a good question, and in our area, I guess with waters and the setup of the Water Services Organisation, there have been good faith conversations about the transfer of debt. Through the previous government's conversations, there was quite a bit of certainty for councils around the transfer of debt. There was an assessment by the DAA. They came in, they assessed what our debt was in the water space, and it was quite clear through that process the amount of debt that would transfer over. Through that, they did look at the level of unfunded depreciation that we had in the water space. They also looked at the level of debt-funded operating costs that we had in the water space to determine whether that, if a council, and they pushed us on ours, because some councils at that time were pushing a little bit harder than they saw they should have, to put more onto debt, knowing that the debt would transfer. At the moment, there hasn't been massive certainty around whether all of the debt would necessarily definitely transfer to the new water services organization. That will be a decision of the new entity. So there's a level of good faith and staying the course probably that will be factored into some of those conversations, I would say. And when I say good faith and staying the course, is probably in terms of council's individual financial strategies. Are they making a significant change to the mix of rates and debt leading into a new entity that would just benefit that community or not? I think those kind of conversations would probably be had collectively with the new water services organization. Okay, so in terms of the capital program side of things, I'm not going to dwell on this slide specifically, but was just to give you a quick view of what does that 4-year capital program look like in the LTP, and how has that changed now in terms of the forecast for this year, the annual plan for next year, and the following 2 years. Overall, that's just a graphical view for you as well. But overall, we've got a net reduction in the capital program of roughly $5 to $6 million over the period of the long-term plan. But we'll continue to monitor, and I think it's been really useful from what I heard from the table around actually being able to see the forward program more regularly in an updated fashion, so you know where projects are at and how it's shifting and how that's affecting the debt as well. That slide there just gives you a sense as well in terms of the changes to the capital program that are proposed both this year and leading into the next 3 years, what that looks like in terms of the change in capital grants as well, and then also that change in the debt-funded operating costs, and that key one being the information services being the key driver to the change in the debt-funded operating costs. And that's for the main reason for that, just to flag as well, is that we are due to upgrade our main authority system, so our enterprise-wide software, in the next 2 years. In terms of a view of what our borrowings looks like, that orange dotted line is our limit of 250%. The dark blue line is what the borrowings are now proposed to be, and then the lighter blue gives you a view of what that looked like in the LTP. So a little bit of movement around, but on a net perspective, it is dropping in that short period of time. So we are sticking to what, in terms of the decisions that this table is making, we are sticking to what we said we would do in terms of the financial strategy. And if anything, doing a bit better in the rate space.
Great. Next, we move into a short update about the fees and charges consultation. So we will be, of course, sharing the submissions with you. We're just in touch with one person who indicated that they would like to speak to their submission. So checking that they would still like to do that, and then arranging for that person to come and do that. What we had is we received 3 submissions. None of them referred to the Food Act or resource management fees and charges that we were specifically consulting on. The 3 each referred to other aspects about fees and charges. One commented about affordability and the costs that were being passed on from council to ratepayers and residents. Another person said that the changes look pretty standard and expected increases. One person talked about Shannon Memorial Hall and pool fees. One said that the litter infringement is way too low, especially in comparison to some of the other penalties, and also that recycling small e-waste parts should be made free. So we'll share those with you and confirm the approach, whether there is a hearing needed as soon as we can. From there, that ties in looking forward to annual plan adoption. So we saw the timeline at the start of this presentation. So from today, with a further workshop to share back any further information, 14th of May being the key date for adoption. What you'll see is that we're proposing to change the format of the annual plan this year to still provide all of the legally required information, but taking on advice that we've had from audit about the length of our documents. This isn't audited, but we had that in mind, but also improving the readability for our community. So what we're proposing to do is a 46-page document that tells a story about what Council has planned for the next year. It'll be centred around the top 12 priorities and other projects being started or completed in the 2025-26 year. And it continues a theme that Council is sticking with the plan agreed in the LTP. Because we're doing that, it gives an opportunity that there isn't consultation to report back in. So there's a gap that would normally be in the annual plan. We can include the compulsory content as mentioned, but what we have looked at is that it doesn't actually need to repeat the activity statements that we have in the long-term plan. What we can do is show the changes and do that in a much shorter way, so that by doing that, it gives the key information, the key changes. People can still refer back to the LTP for the full detail about what the activity does, what the key focus areas are. But by doing that, we reduce it by about 100 pages to make it a much shorter document, which hopefully will be more engaging. And we'll look to make sure that our writing and our style is, of course, engaging, informative, and appropriate. So yes, this is the picture.
Before you get accused of hiding.
Oh, yes. No, it's not looking to hide anything. And so basically hoping that because there's less, that people might look at it more than they may have previously. We'll keep the theming that we've got in the long-term plan, continuing the challenging times, challenging choices, design, and talk people through it. Before we get into the financials, we'd have a little budget explainer, which is just explaining the key terms, to do that at the start of that rather than tucking definitions at the back. Refer to fees and charges, what's changed, and direct people to the website where they can see the full list, and then go into the short overview of the budget by activities. So we are working on that to have that draft ready for you. I just wanted to share that with you, test whether there was any allergic reaction, but we're basing it on that. Great. Thank you. Great. And then we head into the final section, the really important part, to make sure that we have, or that we will provide you with all of the information that you would like ahead of adoption. So now is the chance to just reflect and think about whether there is anything in that regard. And yeah, I might pause there, and if there's anything you'd like to ask.
And then it probably would be good to get that steer in terms of what Monique mentioned around Councillor Grimstone's question around the 8.5 versus potentially changing that number.
Nothing else. I think this is great. The capital expenditure thing has been, we've had a very close, comprehensive look at that, and that's setting a good platform for what we're getting into. As far as what Councillor Grimstone's suggesting, I'm actually comfortable in going out at what we are planning at the 8.5. That to me signals that we've done a heck of a lot of work in terms of trying to understand the economic challenges that a lot of our ratepayers are facing. We've set the direction, and we're doing both really. We're managing costs as well as also keeping to the plan of reducing that depreciation. And I suppose the question I'd have, even if we did bank some of that, we probably wouldn't reach that budget any quicker. It would still be 27, 28, I would imagine, because 1.4% is about $750,000 or something like that. And we're talking, quite a significant amount of money that we're trying to catch up with. So I'm comfortable in terms of going out at 8.5.
Thanks, guys. Just been reflecting on it, really. I think you've done an amazing job, to be honest. What I really like out of it, I'm not the money guy. The money guys are talking, but I like the fact that we're trying to create a document that's more usable, friendly for our community. Because I am concerned when we only get 3 submissions to a critical piece of work, that we need to restore faith in people to engage us in. I think that's probably my only sentiment in terms of the change of direction and the way of thinking about going forward. I do wonder whether there's another piece that needs to go alongside this around comms. Actually just sharing that journey, much more shorter, precise about how we've gone from there to the 8.5, which is celebrating the council are still trying to pull back things, still trying to be more efficient. That's probably all I want to contribute right now. Thank you.
Support Bernie's comments about the 8.5. The thing that puzzled me around the fees and charges in terms of feedback is the dog registration issue, because we had a lot of backlash in terms of the owners individually, but also I thought within the organisation. But it's true to say that has not featured as an issue in terms of the feedback.
And whether that's because the fees and charges were focused on the compulsory ones that we needed to consult on, so the Food Act and resource management ones. Do note that in previous years when we've consulted on them, we've had 1 or no submissions in that period, so it's traditionally been very light in that regard. Also this time that I don't think any of our Food Act charges were actually changing, and only a small number of the resource management ones.
No, that's helpful background. And what we did was within the ambit of the public-private split. So, it was a considered decision, but when the rubber hit the road, what it actually meant to dog owners, responsible dog owners, there was certainly a backlash. But okay, no, thanks for the explanation.
Happy to signal I'm comfortable with direction of travel. No further information needed. On Clint's suggestion, I guess it's just a question to the team would be, if you went to 8.9, that bank saving, it would be general rates funded, right? So, because what I'm trying to understand is, if we agree on a different number rather than 8.5, how it would have to be general rate funded so that it could be used, or are you specifically? I suppose it's a question for Clint then first, and then to you guys. Are you specifically talking about upping the level of payback of, or upping the depreciation on certain class of assets, like, because it'll be how it's then distributed and actually collected from the community will depend on the answer to that question.
The outcome I want is to pay our debt back quicker, or to be able to hit 27 with depreciation and OPEX costs fully covered. And if we can do that quicker, then that's the outcome. there may be a little bit more complicated than expected, but that's the intent.
What kind of figure would you be proposing instead of the 8.5?
Look, frankly, I'd just be picking a number. I'd want to see some advice from officers as to what would the tangible impact be if we were to go 8.7, 8.8, 8.9, and I doubt that there's any appetite to go above 8.9, but what would the tangible benefits be if we were to explore that?
And I would think it wouldn't be huge. I mean, you'd have to make a significant jump to make it worthwhile, and you'd probably be looking at what was proposed in the long-term plan of 9.9 or something like that to make it a real significant. If you're talking 0.2, it's only probably $150,000, which ultimately is not going to have any material impact, I would think, on the depreciation. And my other thinking is that current ratepayers are suffering, and if we can help them get over this current economic climate a little bit, then I'm comfortable in doing that. And depreciation is a catch up from many years. It's not as though it's a catch up for the last couple of years. So I'm more inclined to spread it out a little bit as we've got the plan to do, rather than try and claw it back all in one, quicker.
Could I suggest that in the council report, so officer's recommendation is going to be 8.5%, but in the report we can capture an option whereby if council wanted to set it, like we can give you some advice on, say, for every 100k or every 0.1%, what impact that could have on the funding, the paying back of debt faster. You're right, Mayor Burney, like it will be a small amount, but we can still offer that advice. And then when council consider the adoption of the annual plan, if on the night you're wanting to debate an additional mechanism, that will be available to you because we'll offer the advice.
Look, at the end of the day, what I'd say is I appreciate the offer of alternatives, but at the moment I'm not feeling like that is the view of the table. So unless we get a clearer direction on that, I would indicate we'll stick with status quo. So maybe from a couple of others, and then we might land it, because the last thing I want to do is put officers to work or put something in the council agenda that's not going to even get near a yes anyway. So,
Just noting that Councillor Proctor has his hand up as well.
I just wanted to support Clint's comments and support his idea. I had the same question when the slide came up, that I think we should explore it. It would be remiss of us not to explore what that change and difference could make. I hear what Mayor Burney just said around it being insignificant, but 100,000, 200,000 is not insignificant if it helps us do more in other areas where our services were cut to reduce rates in the first place anyway. So I support Clinton, what he's suggesting. And what Monique just suggested, that if we have the options in the report, then we can debate it and vote accordingly.
Yeah, I'll just voice my support to that as well. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm more inclined to be with Mayor Burney on this one. I think in terms of the signal it sends to our ratepayers, it's more important.
We can definitely provide that in the paper. Just to give you a quick signal now, 0.1% is approximately 62,000. So for every 0.1%, you would be reducing debt by a further 62,000. In terms of if the decision was to link it directly to funding more depreciation, the areas where we're currently not funding depreciation are predominantly of the sort of 5 million range, are mostly in the water space. But there is approximately 300,000 as well sitting in that property space. So if a decision was made to increase rates by that 62,000 to get a further 0.1, then the council could make a decision about which area that would go to. So because we would absolutely have to apportion it directly to a particular activity.
Yes, so guys, I said probably Mike and Bernie around that, but I'm interested to see what money proposed for the paper, because no doubt the debate will come back down to long-term relief through less interest on borrowings, or immediate impact now to the ratepayer. So that's what it'll come down to. But happy to see that in the report as proposed by Monique. In terms of what you presented today, you're really comfortable. No changes.
And the advice will be high level, right? It will be similar to the advice Jacinta's just offered, but it will be written in a way where you can then consider that against the 8.5.
Is there any other questions or comments that anybody wanted to raise? We're at the end of the points that we wanted to mention today, so just wanted to test whether there was anything else.
Yeah, look, I'd just double down on Justin's comments around within the annual plan, to really convey the journey that we've come on to land where we potentially end up landing in that space. I think that's an important message, and if you can weave in, I guess, that holding the line to that 2027 point as well. So I'm sure that would have been in there anyway.
Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we appreciate your feedback.
You wait for me. No, there you go. Yep.
Thanks. It's doing a sense check. Kia ora, councillors. We're just working fine. I feel like we were only here just the other day talking about the Strategic Recreation Investment Framework, which is probably a good thing because we are moving at pace and making some really good progress with this piece of work. So it's good to get back in front of you today. I'm not going to talk too much. I'm going to hand it back over to Andy and Anita. Anita is online with us today, streaming in from Auckland. Andy is obviously here with us in person, who you've met before from Visitor Solutions, the team working with us on this piece of work. Like I said, we're making some really good progress. I suppose my key message around today's presentation and workshop is, and I keep saying this to the team, that the framework that we're developing requires a lot of councillor buy-in, investment and ownership, because at the end of the day it's going to be the tool that you use. So hence why we've had these touch points and coming in and speaking to you. I think today you'll get a sense of what it looks and feels like. I mean, you would have seen that in your pre-reading. We've got some key questions that we want to ask you today. And yeah, I think that's all I'll probably say, and I'll just hand over to Andy and talk you through it. And obviously, as per normal, if you've got any questions throughout, please speak out. If we've got time, we've got a bit of an activity we'd like to do to understand some prioritisation around a key part of the framework, but we'll just see how we go for time, and we'll play it with you. Andy.
Thanks, Mark. Kia ora koutou. Good to see you all again. So just going through some slides quite quickly. Again, I'm sure I don't need to introduce the purpose of the framework, but one thing I do just want to re-emphasise is around that needs analysis component of this. And at the last workshop, we reconfirmed that the scope was narrowed down to looking at aquatic facilities, indoor recreation facilities, and outdoor surfaces. And the other facility types and that can be assessed through the framework as and when needed throughout the process. So from this workshop, as Mark mentioned before, is that we want your input to help shape key components for inclusion within the framework. So starting with, why does Council invest in sport and recreation assets? What is the desired outcome from this investment? And that builds on from our last workshop where we discussed what Council wants from its investment and the outcomes that we're seeking, and we'll go through a bit of an exercise and you'll see some of that reflected in some of our discussion shortly. The roles that Council plays in sport and recreation provision, the process that Council could use to make decisions, and critically at the end, the criteria to assess the impact of potential investment decisions as well. So the purpose of the workshop is the full suite of these, is being able to show what we've done, but also to incorporate the feedback that we've received from the previous workshop, and then to get some direction, some guidance on where to from here. So it's critical to start from the strategic context component of this. So when developing the framework, we've really leaned on the existing strategies and plans that are out there. And we really want to make sure that we've got that alignment and to provide the direction forward. And what you'll hopefully see throughout this is that the wording and some of the terminologies and focuses that you have in your other strategies are permeated throughout the framework. So we've sort of got a top-down approach of looking at the strategic outcomes that have been stated, and then also resonating through in the 2040 blueprint. And then we've also got some other inputting factors as well. So looking at the community wellbeing framework, and then looking through our growth strategy and the integrated growth program as well, and then also considering some of the other things out there that are in the wider sport and recreation sector, so that being through Sport New Zealand and also through Horowhenua as well, in terms of the regional spaces and places strategy. And then also pulling through what we've learned. We've worked with a number of councils on similar projects, and seeing what works and what needs framed, and making sure that it's got the local context of Horowhenua at the heart of everything. So to start with, when developing the framework, it's really important that it resonates why Council invests in sport and active recreation. And so to start with, we thought it was really important to pull through around the livability of our people and growing the prosperity of our district, and we thought that was really important, and it resonated well within the from the 2040 blueprint, and then also some engagements that we've had with Mana Whenua as well and some other groups. Is that really needs to be the essence of what we're trying to capture, and the why sits in and around that. So you probably would have seen some of this in the pre-reading, that we've identified 6 focus areas that is the why around investment from Council. So being economic development, cultural identity, environmental outcomes, connectivity, wellbeing, and being accessible and sustainable. Now, with those, it's really important that we get these right, because they're going to form the foundation of the framework. So we're really keen to get some thoughts or some feedback on the why, and we can work through some of the wordsmithing of some of this, but in terms of that, the key reasons for why Council invests, is there any thoughts initially on what's outlined there?
G'day. Probably just, and I'm not sure if this is under this heading or the impact assessment criteria. I kind of was in two minds about where it sits. But it's this whole concept of linking the idea of level of service with the whole value for money proposition, because it's about achieving all of these things, but at its core, it's about meeting a level of service expectation, demand, need. And I know we've talked about that word need, but like it's a demand and it's an expectation. And it might actually get to a point where it is a really identified need for health and well-being, all that stuff. But so it's kind of, I don't know how it sits, and I was kind of contemplating whether it sits here, but because it's kind of at the heart of it, which is that we're doing this because we're kind of agreeing that there's a level of service that we're choosing to provide, but it's about doing it in a way that is good value for money, optimized, and this is probably where it becomes more of an impact criteria, which is the opportunity for collaboration, multifunction, that kind of trying to look at sort of complementary activities, that kind of thing. And so, yes, sorry, that's a bit of a disjointed comment. And so I don't know whether it sits here or can be incorporated here, or whether it's a kind of an impact criteria. And I welcome your off the cuff thoughts in response to that.
All right, some off the cuff thoughts. I think it's a really good point that you raised. Our thinking is it's embedded within the impact assessment criteria, and we haven't fleshed out the key components of that. And so we'll show you some, like one of the examples, a little bit later on. But there will be on the continuums around the criteria of what high looks like and what low looks like. And so within that, then it will start to be look at what that value is, what's the current level of service, where does that sit, because that's driven by need, demand, and all that sort of information that comes through to actually assess with that particular project or opportunity that arises, whereas this is more around the more generic why does council invest, and these are some real key sort of outcome focused type things.
Very comfortable with that response. So it's under this, which is thank you.
Yeah. Hey guys, just mine's ticking over thinking. Look, a couple of things for me, and it was really picking up on Councillor Jennings' point around demand and need. And I'm not sure whether we capture it in the framework, but it's actually about the intergenerational change in needs in our district. And what I mean by that is some things that we saw growing up, we didn't see for 20 years, and then today we see them again. Skateboarding, roller skating, all those little activities that sometimes phase in, phase out. And I suppose what I'm really signalling is that is our core responsibility as a council to cater for individual sports needs, or is our role as council to maintain facilities and assets to ensure that as our community and our generations pivot, that we pivot with them. What I don't want to do is end up in a place where the framework leads us to determine that these assets are deemed now non-core or not needed or not, that sort of behaviour, because we haven't actually put the lens over it of actually our people are always changing what they want to do, and look at sports that have popped up like what's that? Yeah, that one, pickleball. Never heard of it, but it's gone crazy. It looks like it could be here for a long time. When I was in school, we called it paddle tennis. So, same sport, different nature, but it's reinvigorated people to become active. So that's a comment I wanted to share. So whether it's really relevant or not, I'm not sure, but that's just in my mind. I want to know that we're capturing and thinking about that sort of stuff. Culture. I do sometimes get a bit perplexed when I see terminology about mana whenua and then further down the document, tangata whenua. For me, I think I probably more aligned to partners or those critical stakeholders, that sort of language for me. And the reason I say that I've had too much experience in my realm about the way in which either of those two words are applied. And so how do we do it without implying what they could do? At the end of the day, this council has to continue to facilitate to our Māori community, and it doesn't matter whether that's tangata whenua or mana whenua status. It becomes controversial when you start using those words. But I also just wanted to say in that cultural space, I would have to signal out here and identify that the data says the health statistics for Polynesian and Māori people are exceptionally low to our other parts of our society. And so I would be encouraged to say that people might not like what I'm going to say, but elevating the need to have our Polynesian people connected, active and out there and being involved. But I'm going to say it because it's actually factual and science says that. That's probably just the two things that I want to consider and how we capture those in that cultural identity space. Kia ora.
Kia ora, very well made points. If I start with the first one, again, it comes into the impact assessment part, is around when you're talking about core or new activities that come through. And the key thing with that is around adaptability and flexibility of the spaces that we invest in and how we actually do that. So you brought up the example of pickleball, which is a great example, which is obviously booming. And where is it played at the moment? You've been able to mark the netball courts, you've been able to mark the event centre. And so that's about being able to use our assets in different ways to respond to what those changing needs and demands are. And that's key things that we need to focus on. And then when we start to look at allocation, it comes like an allocation type thing as well, to go, just because we've been allocating spaces for particular codes this way, we may actually need to review that and actually think a little bit more differently. So it's how we use the assets as much as it is about capital investment at the same time. And yes, we're very conscious of the terminologies and things that's used as well, and we will be looking at that and we can respond. Thank you.
Look, I'm just picking up on the cultural points, just thinking out loud, move away from the Te Ao Māori or Pacifica view. I'm just wondering whether there's an essence of capturing how sports are within the cultural fabric of our community as it is, without actually talking to ethnicity. Because the reality is that there are certain sports there that are well-bred, already supported and are already established fundamentals within the cultural ethos of us as New Zealanders, and more importantly us here in the Horowhenua context as well. So I'd probably be keen to see that reflected through the document in some way.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Stone. I would just add, and we'll take those notes away around cultural identity. The team have plucked some wording out of the community wellbeing strategy, which is where this will be reflective. But what we can do is we can go away and finesse that a little bit, taking on board the two lots of feedback. So thank you.
Okay, all right, we will progress on. So it's also important to recognise the role that council plays within investment as well, and there's varying ways. So it's actually on a massive continuum of going from the left of own, develop, and operate facilities. So if we look at Donnelly Park Fields, for instance, you do everything. And then it goes all the way down to the other side where we're talking about a facility enabler. And so that could be through a ground lease, it could be access into your buildings. And so recent examples around the development of the pavilion at Levin Domain. And then in the middle, we can also have facility partnerships as well, where you could be putting in some capital, or you could be working alongside another group or agency to operate or develop a facility. So, for instance, Shannon Pool in terms of the operations of that to ensure that we're getting public access to a school-owned asset. So that's where we've got this wide continuum, and when we're starting to look at the framework and putting particular projects and opportunities through, we need to understand we council may sit within that We know within current budget it's going to be very difficult to be on the left for everything, and we need to realise that, and those proponents of facilities out there also need to recognise where council could play a part of that. And there's various different ways. You can see in the light green at the bottom, there's ways and means of using the skills and expertise that you've got there, your management and operations of facilities, as well as it being through capital OPEX as well. It doesn't just have to be on the money side of things.
I really like the slide, and I think it'll be important to also just be really clear that the roles aren't necessarily in column 1, 2, or 3. There's some overlapping of these, because we could be a owner of a facility but then actually have someone else operating it or conducting certain commercial activities or whatever. So it's like a continuum, and I think it's really good to paint that picture. I think well done. I like it.
All right. As you'll appreciate, everyone has different perspectives on criteria. And so we're sort of going to take you through a bit of a process in and around this to understand. You'll represent the communities out there, and so we're really keen to get your perspectives on where these sit. So we've created some headline criteria that sit within the why, and that's why, saying why too often, we want to make sure that everything aligns and get that wording correct from the initial slide that we spoke about, because they directly align into where the criteria is here. So just to show you sort of where this will go, at the moment, some will have more words than others, just to try and provide a little bit more context, but this is meant to be sort of a high line of what the criteria is, and sort of where we'll move to that I sort of alluded to before. So with this one around economic development, is you get this continuum of a scale of 1 to 5, and on the right hand side, that is where you'd be attributing to the high quality features for that particular criteria versus the low. So when you're making those assessment calls and scoring them, you know what sits within that to try and make that a little bit easier. So at the moment, we're looking at these high levels, but we will flesh that out so then there's more context and understanding of how you actually score that and what does that actually look like. But first and foremost, we want to make sure we've got the right criteria in that first before we start fleshing that through, which you'll get to see in the next iteration when we come back for the following workshop. But as part of this process, and Mark's going to be my part administrator here, we've got these printed all off into 9 to reflect the 9 there, and individually we want you to have a read through these criteria. Hopefully you've seen the pre-reading in any case, and then we want to put them in order of your rankings of highest priority in terms of that criteria to the lowest at the bottom, and Mark will then come around once you've finished to take a photo of each, so then we've got them recorded. If you've got any questions about what the criteria is or means or composes of, then feel free to ask, because sometimes it's a terminology thing, and that's where the scoring part will be easier when it gets to it, because we'll have a little bit more information to sit alongside.
Yeah, I just understand, picking up on what Andy said, I think when we've been talking to the team about this piece, this is quite a critical part of the framework, and again, like I said in the introduction, it's really important that elected members have a sense of ownership over this process, and so it's really, really good to spend the time on these parts. So happy to take any questions as they come through.
Are we asking your stakeholders to do this as well, are we?
You raise a very good point there, Bernie, that I forgot to mention in my introduction. So we have a steering group that has been established. So not necessarily stakeholders, it's made up of the internal staff, but external stakeholders such as Sport Manawatu, etc. And yes, we'll be doing a similar exercise with them. Yes, if you put them in order from, high priority at the top, low priority at the bottom. If there's any questions, otherwise I'll happy to come and take a photo.
Councillor Jennings, I just want to double check that your original question around level of service, you can see that within this?
Yeah.
We, just putting it out there, we could add in or flesh out point number 3 to add that in.
It's kind of a little bit about Justin's point around the level of service, because, like, for example, just because the community want a burnout pad or a new chess club or a motocross circuit or a frisbee golf park doesn't mean that council should provide it. And so there's kind of going to be a criteria about the... Yeah, I know it's kind of covered by all of them because it's a bit about well-being. It's a little bit about criticality. I don't know. Sorry, I'm not being...
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's probably more so within 3, but as you would have seen in like this slide here, it's stuff that we can build in on the side here as well. If it doesn't quite get articulated within 3, which we can play around with the words to see if we can incorporate it, but on this side here we can talk about level of service and that there is going, where's that sit?
Because the only other one that, like on 4...
Sorry, Sam, I just want to make sure the consultant is hearing everything. So I just want to make sure everyone was able to hear what you're about to say.
On 5, it's kind of also captured in 3, but it's this whole concept of multifunctionality, and you described it really nicely before, which was about the adaptability or being able to adapt either on a rolling basis or like convert something to something else, or being multifunctional, adaptable, sort of complementary activities, and so it might be that I suppose that's covered by utilisation. Like if we've got a club that uses the club rooms on the weekends, but there might be other non-sporting clubs that could use the same spaces during the week, so it means we don't have to provide another building. And so it's like kind of, it's a network of, it's a complementary, multifunctional of sporting or recreational facilities, but also maybe how it might lend or incorporate into that broader network of community facilities that council might provide. I don't know if how we could embed that in there in a way that doesn't over-egg it.
Yeah, the wide outcomes bit is always challenging with this when it goes outside the realms of sport and recreation, but it can feed into other community outcomes, but it still plays a critical part of it. And so this is something that we're always debating in and around, and you get quite a few on the surf life-saving space within this as well, to how much is sport and recreation and you doing that in that realm versus the wider outcomes that surf life-saving actually provides. And so when we have funds that are in particular around sport and rec, they go, well, it's actually narrow from a surf life-saving perspective, but we understand all the other community stuff, and so there's always debate and dilemma across the sector in terms of some of that. All right, so that was a pretty challenging exercise to start with, and what is really important for us to do, you'll see all the zeros in the weighting column at the moment. The weightings are going to be the critical element of this, because that's going to really set where we're going to, how the assessment's actually going to come out. So when we're putting through 2 projects at once and that sort of thing, it's going to come down to the trade-offs of where those weightings are. And we'll be going through some exercises and we'll speak to some of the next steps. But going through an exercise to actually get those weightings split out, and your feedback from all this exercise now will factor into some of that thinking as well. So next time that we present, there'll be weightings against these, and so then we'll do some testing in that with some other projects to see how that sits as well.
Yeah, I guess the exciting thing that I find about the weighting concept is the ability for us to take this piece of work, pick it up, and actually apply it to what we already do in this space, so that we can identify areas within sports and recreation where we potentially have a disconnect, or where we are currently over investing in providing certain services for certain things. So I think that this criteria potentially helps us determine that return on investment that we're already making through our current books. And
All right, so we're just going to go through the evaluation process now. So we've tried to keep this as simple as possible. You could make it very convoluted and very complex, but we've tried to use some existing frameworks to try and set this out. So the first one being the Sport New Zealand Spaces and Places framework, which outlines the life cycle of a facility, and that's where you start with identifying what the challenge or the issue is, and that typically comes through just within a project background or a concept brief, and understanding what that could be. So from there, then we identify, once that project's come to light, there's a couple of ways we can look at it. One, that it's a local council project. So if it's, let's say it's a sports field, for instance, then you'll be putting through that initial framework to go, is that something that we want to be pursuing or not? And so it's an initial gateway criteria at that very initial stage to determine whether or not you should actually be doing anything more in that space, if it's more planning or actually considering taking it through to capital investment. And then there's also ones that are non-council, and those that are a sub-regional level or higher facility across the district. And that's where we'll bring in Horowhenua, which has a framework that caters for that sub-regional and higher, and also non-council facilities. So they go through that process, and that goes through a navigator, and a recommendation will be initially through a gateway process as well, to whether or not that should be going forward, or if there's more thinking that needs to be had on that project. And then the framework also has another component to that. Is if that project does look like it's got some legs, then your framework can then come into play to go, actually, is that of value that we should actually be helping with the investment into doing some planning work on that? And then go, do we need to do feasibilities, business cases or something? And if it's something that council is willing to invest in, then you put through that framework and decide whether or not to proceed. Then we start getting into typical things like needs assessments, feasibility studies, business case, cost-benefit analysis. And then when we've got that sort of body of work, then we go, okay, well, what comes out of that then? Because that's going to be your point, critical point to start understanding whether or not we need to be investing into the capital or starting to get into design and consents. So again, the local council project would go directly through, and then we'd go through Horowhenua for non-council or sub-regional hire facilities, and then it'll come back through, if it's on that right side of the diagram, to decide whether or not council should be looking at putting in for design, consent and construction, and in what role could council actually be playing within that. It could be a partner, again, it could be just an enabler going, yep, we see value in this, and we are happy to give you a ground lease to actually develop on our site. And then ultimately it'll go through, or the project comes to an end because actually the proposition isn't strong enough, or it's going to be outside the LTP process time frame.
This is again pretty good. I like this. Just want to test this with you. This will apply irrespective of how the project comes to council. So it could be something that's recommended by officers. It could be a community group coming to us saying, we want you to establish a pickleball court or whatever. And so it goes through the same gateway assessment irrespective of where it's coming from, right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever form it comes in from, whoever the proponent is, you'd be putting it through the framework regardless.
I think from Councillor Jennings, from an operational perspective, what you would expect to see, and this is what we've initially been thinking, is that, say, if wherever it comes from, if it comes from a group from outside of council, whether it's a council-funded project, officers would go away, use the framework, and we would obviously bring a report back that would have all these considerations and how we've gone through this journey and explain it and show it, so that councillors can have absolute certainty that we've followed the framework, and then councillors will then have a really good way of having an informed decision-making aligned with that, if that helps answer some of your question.
No, it does, because I'm envisaging like a long-term plan process where we get submissions on all sorts of stuff. And so, like, for example, a council resolution on a submission might be, yes, hey, team, we'd like you to go away and put this idea through this matrix or through this framework, even though that it's really at a sort of early idea phase and there's not much sort of flesh to it. Is that kind of how you'd envisage it working? Because that's the kind of, people come to us often with unformed, incomplete thinking and an incomplete proposal. It's just a concept or an idea, and we either want to be able to say thanks but no thanks, or yeah, look, we're willing to invest a little bit of time and effort and resource by putting it through this framework. Is it? Yeah.
Very much so, and you can determine what role you play within that. It could be that you're just going to help with your skills and expertise and guidance, or it could be, yes, we can actually put some investment in to do some planning work or whatever it may be, but that's where you put it through the criteria first and go, what value and what budget do we have at the current time to do that, and where does that sit time-wise as well.
The only thing I'd add, Councillor Jennings, thinking about that, if it was an external group, some of the information might be missing compared to, say, we've got a council project. I would like to think that we would have some solid information, some solid data, compared to maybe a community group that's coming through who haven't done any feasibility work. So some of that might be missing and might be hard to navigate through, and we'd just have to do the best we can. But yeah.
Yeah, you'd be considering it on the information that you've got available and putting it through that process and then redirecting, saying, you need to go and do X, Y, and Z first. So it's a directory guidance piece as well as an informing piece for council's side. So from project evaluation, this sort of builds on a lot of what we've sort of discussed, is that there's a lot of informing documents and steps that can go through, from network assessments right through the suite to regional steering group assessment, which sits within Horowhenua. And so a lot of that information then starts feeding into the assessment component. So we've identified 3 assessment components here. So one being the network assessment, and we look at the criticality of that, and we use a traffic light system of high, medium, and low. When is it required? Again, that should be a really key component when we're talking to anyone, including council staff, in terms of when is it actually required. It's always an immediate need, but actually when we're looking at population growth and where current assets and things are, when is it actually required? And that's important. So we've tried to frame it up along the lines of the LTP to go, is it needed in the next 1 to 3 years, 4 to 6, 7 plus years? Then determining council's role to what is being asked of council in the first place, and then the key question always to go is, well, what would happen if council didn't invest in that project or opportunity? And then the last one that we've spoken about in terms of that criteria is the impact assessment. And so that will have score bandings against it as well, once we go through the criteria and the weighting exercise to understand where those score bandings will sit. And again, that will be on a high, medium, low scale. And so then we can start looking at the sort of traffic light system to go, well, if it's highly critical within the network, it's needed in the next 1 to 3 years, doesn't matter so much around council's role, depending on potentially if it's large capital investment or the score bandings being really high, that's going to be something that we really need to focus on. So when this information gets presented, you'll get that sort of traffic light system that will have council's potential role within that, and then sitting alongside it will be the cost of the project and what that looks like, and then also the rationale that sits in behind that project as well. So culminating all that sort of information together, do you think that provides, presented in a form and enough information that will help with your decision making? Okay.
I just feel like there's one. I feel like in the council world there should have just been a box that just says to own, nothing more, nothing less, because then that'll facilitate the other three boxes and what they look like going forward. But if the council's role was just purely just to ensure we maintain and own those core things, then it's up to those other three boxes in terms to what it could like progressing forward.
Yeah, a little bit like Justin. I was thinking that maybe it does need another box that's kind of like hybrid, because there, as we said, there's kind of things where you might be the owner, but you might not actually operate it, or it might purely be a facility that's used by 5 different groups or 5 different codes, and so there's kind of going to be some hybrids of those. I don't mean that.
Yeah. We'll certainly go back to look at the council on how we can sort of define that. We tried to keep it clean and as simple as possible, but it could be that there's some narrative that sits in that, so it's not just solely a box that you'll see and it speaks to it, but we'll have a wee play around post this. So in terms of the next steps, so we're going to take on board the feedback and insights that you've provided today, and this is also going out to Horowhenua for feedback and insights. We'll draft up that framework. We're going to be going through a weighting exercise that Mark alluded to before, and we're going to continue working through the network needs analysis. So we've undertaken a lot of meetings in the last couple of days with different codes, and so that's been really helpful, and they're going to be providing a lot of detailed information for us, which will actually assist with our needs analysis when we start getting into understanding where they sit, and we can put them through the framework in terms of the projects and opportunities that align with those facility types. So come the next workshop, we'll have the draft framework complete for your review alongside the weightings, and we're hoping to have some key findings presented on some of the network needs analysis. It won't be complete by the time we come back in a few weeks, but hopefully we'll have enough to show you, to give you a sense of what's coming through. So that's probably the level of information that we were intending to provide for the workshop today, but I'm open to any questions from everyone.
Yeah, I've touched on it before, and it's I didn't sort of see it in there or a reference to it, but it might be in your thinking, and that's along and it mentioned duplication, and I've talked about pretty like there's schools like big colleges where there's big playing fields that are very much underutilised these days, quite often, particularly rugby fields and no first 15s in some of the colleges anymore, those sorts of things, so not used to the extent they were. So the ability or the option for council or the community to partner with schools, share costs and that sort of stuff, is that within that thinking somewhere?
That certainly comes down to the solution side of things, and so when it goes through the criteria, that will be considered to go, well, if you are looking to do something in the sports field, for instance, you go, okay, well, what does the wider network look like? Is there opportunities to partner with schools in that first? And you'd be weighing those sort of things up to go, is this the best thing that we should be doing? And that will factor into the scoring of that.
Actually, to Ross's point, and maybe that's what's missing for me in terms of that. I think those 3, 4, 5 of those criteria was maybe it is something about alternatives or like the availability of alternative infrastructure or options to meet the demand, because I get that the weighting of the criteria might say, okay, well, it's not weighted very high because there is other things. But I wonder if there's a criteria that specifically talks to that network point, which is going, well, I suppose it comes down to criticality, doesn't it? Because it's like, do we really need this, given you've got 3 fields within 500 metres of what you're proposing. I don't know, like it's...
Yeah, I think you nailed it in terms of, have I answered my question in terms of the criticality part? So yes, it sits 100% there. The other part of that is trying to intercept it before it gets to actually evaluating it. So when you're doing options assessments and that is part of feasibility studies or even before that, that should be nailed really early. They're getting to the end point of going, we've done all this work, and then we go, well, have you actually considered this or this? Oh no, we haven't. So it's trying to get in really early on those projects, and that's where Sport Manawatu will play a key role, as well as council staff, and identifying those and making sure it does the due diligence during the planning phases as opposed to it being an investment decision component.
Yeah, I probably have a little bit of resistance to those types of considerations because I feel like it muddies the framework and what the framework's meant to achieve for regional assets that belong to communities. When you start bridging into schools and things, there's a whole lot of other rules and complexities around Ministry of Education and a whole process behind that. But then you start leaning on, we're going to start talking to golf clubs and things like that too, and partner, like it just goes somewhere different for me. So I'm more about focusing on where we already are and what we got and how we use it to the best of its ability without compromising and going elsewhere to look at someone else's. Colleges and schools are a great example, but they actually facilitate probably 20 different sports on those fields and a whole lot of different activities as well as. So, and although we might see them being absent or not used a lot, we also know that schools have completely changed the way that we access schools outside of school hours. And there's reasons why they've done that. So, yeah.
I think, talking to your point, that actually within the framework as put up, I think what you're talking to is captured under the environmental outcomes here. It's just potentially picking up on the wording and expanding what we mean from an environmental outcome in a sports and recreational review. So talking to the fact that the better use of public space, parks, fields and recreational areas could come into a sustainable development where you've got eco-friendly recreational facilities that you're actually establishing from an environmental and sustainability perspective. So I think it's captured. It's just that way of thinking isn't obvious within the wording as it's set there, but I think if you could work on that, that would make it really, really clear that the options pieces within the environmental scanning piece.
I was just going to say, just to cover your point, Councillor Tamihara, absolutely, obviously, considering what we've got now, I think the key piece, and you've briefly mentioned it, was the Hiraki Tour piece, which is Sport Manawatu led, but is regional and is being directed by Sport New Zealand. And I think the piece in there talks a lot about that multi-use facility and that piece. And Sport New Zealand doing a lot of work around councils utilising schools and multi-use facilities. Like, it's been a big priority for them. There's also a piece in there around, depending on funding, public funding, DIA funding, aligning with some of those strategic priorities that either Hiraki Tour talks about or Sport New Zealand talks about. So I suppose I'm just acknowledging that absolutely you're talking about, let's look after now, but I suppose those future things as well. Yes, hear your point, but some of it we would have to go through those pieces of work to navigate. Hopefully that helps. Okay. Well, it doesn't appear to be any more questions. Yeah, good progress. So, Andy's mentioned it. So our next workshop, I just had it up. Sorry, it's in late May, 29th May. That will be quite a substantial workshop because we'll have quite a bit of information to talk through, with the intent of seeking adoption at a council meeting the following month. So we're on track, on a good journey. So, and if obviously there's any questions, please fire them through. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks everyone.